I've called my topic Modernising Your JADE Application. So the idea is that there's some simple things you can do with skins to take an application that looks like it came from, say, Windows 3.1.1 days, and with very little effort, make it look like a more modern application. So does your application look dated? I don't know how long some of you work with JADE, but most of you probably remember 640 by 480 desktops. Certainly when we started the ICM product, which I still on, we had to support that desktop size. Some of our clients were using very old equipment. And they might look like Windows 3.1 apps where there were no colours or very limited colours, so everything's just grey with a blue title bar and there's no visual cues as to what information may or may not be more important than any other information. You might have icons in your system that got designed back in the days of 16 colour or 256 colour. So they could, a simple update to your icons might make your product look a little bit more modern. And I'm pretty sure some of us have worked on JADE systems that looked a bit like this, where because of that 640 by 480 limitation, and because mouse wheels didn't exist in these days, and scrolling was bad, we tried to cram as much as we could onto a screen, and we tried to do things with tab buttons to swap between different parts of the screen, because scrolling vertically or scrolling full stop was hard. You had to go across onto the actual scroll bar and drag it or push the up and down buttons. And we also wanted to get as much detail on the screen as we could, so we squished our lines up. We didn't have much gap between our lines and our tables and our list boxes because getting the information on a single screen was very important. But things have moved on. There's been a change of mindset in our users. People expect crisp modern UIs. They want the UI to get out of the way of the information they want to see. So if we go back to the early 2000s or the late 90s, it was all about making buttons as Gucci and 3D and graphically intense as possible. And people don't like that. They want to see the real information, not the user interface Chrome. And screen resolutions have vastly improved for the desktop users. So these days, widescreen monitors and stuff's pretty normal. Even your laptops are getting fairly good screen resolutions on them these days. Mouse wheels are the norm. Back in the days when we first started ICM, you had to ask and beg, borrow and steal to get a mouse with a wheel, and JADE didn't respond to the mouse wheel in those days. Gestures are also becoming more common, so people are on touch devices where they just drag a couple of fingers to vertically or horizontally scroll. So scrolling used to be the real bad boy. It's not as bad as it was, and users are very comfortable with vertical scrolling and continuous vertical scrolling thanks to things like Facebook and generally websites in general. And so there's been a real trend recently to just using vertical scrolling and hyperlink jump lists somewhere up on your page that don't disappear rather than putting things across on tabs. But there are a number of quick wins that you can do without having to re-engineer the entire user interface of your app. You can just make your borders more subtle. So by default, things are either black or fairly dark grey. If you just mute those down so that they're still there, but they're toned down and don't leap out at people, that can help. You can increase the default row height in your tables and your list boxes. And you can implement more modern colours with the JADE skin, which is where we're going to go with this presentation. So a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about, you go, I can't afford to go through and change 1,200 forms in my system. Well, if what you're talking about is your grid colour on tables, your border colour, your row height, you can write a JADE script to update all your forms, and then you just need to save your top level form to rebuild the form build data. You haven't had to go and visit every form to get some of these benefits that we're talking about here. So I'll go through and I'll just show some of what we did with the Investigator application, taking on board some of this information. So our initial logon screen doesn't look like it's that busy, but if you take a look at some of these corners, we've got a colour change from a dark to a light blue to a slightly different light blue to another dark to a grey, and in fact it just continues on with the colour changes. Doesn't really add any value to the application, doesn't make a better user experience, but it does add a lot of visual clutter and noise. So what I did to change that initially, and this was just me as a developer, not a person who's an expert with graphics or graphic packages, I just flattened the borders, got rid of the multiple layers and spread things out a bit more. And that was a big improvement. Our users liked that. But then I got our graphics people involved, and by graphics I mean Gray and Mia, and they turned it into this, which is a considerable improvement on what we had in terms of making it look more appealing, making it look more modern, making it look less Windows 3.1. And then from that point on, it's just been different colour variations as we've moved through the various releases of Investigator. And then So that's what we did with just the logon form, and that was a really simple change. Most of it was just changing that graphic that was the backwash on the screen. If I just go back one slide, a lot of these borders down here were all coming from the image we were using as the background image for the screen. So changed that image, that did pretty much all the work for us, and then it was just tidying up the borders. For our main form, we had similar issues where we had lots of noise with lots of vertical lines and horizontal lines, big obvious separator bars for realigning, a nice big thick line below our menu bar for no good reason. I don't know why we made it that thick. And then if I walk across this side, on our nav bar area, we had thumb grips visible on these, even though we didn't allow undocking of those bars. And the first thing I did, again, without any help from our graphics people, was just flatten it all down and try and make things less noticeable. Our controls, rather than them having their own border, I just spread them down so that the resize bar provided the bottom borders or the top borders or the left borders on things. But that only went so far. And when you get graphics people involved, the only difference between that and this version was, one, the application of the skin that the graphics people were able to give us, and two, I spread the height of our list boxes and tables. So from that to that was just a skin. No changes were made to where things were positioned on forms. And from our user's perspective, because the controls were staying in relatively the same place, there was no new learning curve. Actually, I tell a lie. We had people complaining about this width taking up space that could be used for detail. So we actually, and this was back in the days of, I think we're up to 800 by 600 at this point. So we actually got rid of that and replaced it all with tab bars and, I'll come across it, with folder tabs, because scrolling still wasn't that popular. But you'll notice that we've only got 4, and back on that screen we had a whole lot of navbar entries. So basically the first 4 are accessible from there, and when you click on that last star tab, it just drops down a drop-down menu that has all of the other elements that we were missing. And then after that, we just went for a slightly different color scheme. So from this one here to this one here, it really was just changing the skins, and it changed the entire look of the application. And one of John's favorite things is down in the bottom left corner, we've got a little red 3 with a badge to tell them that I've got 3 unread alerts. And again, that's just a label control with a skin category applied to it that gives it the red color with the white foreground text. But what would our app look like now if I didn't have the skin applied? So what I did is I just put a click event into the square box up in the top left corner. Oh, that square box is where the company would normally put their own logo. So I've just left it blank in this demo. So I just put a click event on that picture control to say, turn off the skin. And that's what that app looks like without the skin. So between that, which looks very Windows 3.1 or very old school, and that, the only difference made is turn off the skin, turn on the skin. And I did mention before the value of white space. So this form, the developer thought, great, I've done a good job. I got all the rows of data I needed to display on the form without any scroll bar, because scroll bars were bad because mouse wheels didn't exist yet. But isn't that a lot more readable and a lot more modern? And what I changed between that was actually I'll put them both side by side for you. I turned off the 3D on the fixed rows. I increased the row height. I made the borders look less obvious, toned down the color scheme of them. And okay, so I did cheat a bit. I actually brought them in from the edges, which is more than just a coding change, as I mentioned. But if I put up one where all I've done is increase the row height and turn off the 3D borders, it's not quite as much of an improvement as this one, but it's just a JADE script away to look like that. So it still lifts even just that, just making the row height better, even with the darker grids is still good, but just toning down the grids helped reinforce the information that's important and get rid of the chrome that's around the controls. So that's the end of my overview of what I did with Investigator. Has anyone got any questions before I hand over to Mia?